The large hangar bay was the heart of the station. It was a place of constant noise and movement. Ships landed and took off. Crews moved supplies. Machines hummed and tools clanged. The air was thin and carried the sharp smell of metal and fuel. To most of the beings there, it was a normal workplace. But for Kang Ji-hoo, it always felt a little wrong. Her body felt heavy, yet also held back. The gravity on the station was much lighter than what she was used to. Every step felt a little too floaty. Every lift felt a little too easy, until she remembered the machines here were built for this weak pull. She missed the honest, heavy weight of her home. She was working on a heavy lift loader, a machine designed to move cargo containers. Her hand rested on its cold, metal side as she ran a diagnostic check. Her movements were smooth and strong. She did not waste any motion. Across the bay, other species went about their work. The lumine were tall and thin, like reeds swaying in the wind. They moved with a quiet grace. The Geks were small and quick, with 4 arms that chittered and worked on complex wiring. They all glanced at Ji-hoo from time to time. She was the odd one, the Deathworlder. That was their name for humans. It was not a friendly name. Came from their home planet, Earth. The galaxy saw Earth as a nightmare world. This gravity was crushing. Its animals were deadly. This weather was violent. To them, anyone from there was a freak of nature, built for survival in a place that should not support life. Ji-hoo was used to the stares. She kept her focus on her work. Up on a high observation deck, 2 men watched her. One was Sergeant Lee Chul. He was a practical man with a tired face. He had been in the Galactic Peacekeeping Corps for 20 years. He had seen a lot. He saw Ji-hoo for what she was, a reliable soldier. She did her job. She did not complain. And when things broke, she was often the one who could fix them with pure muscle. The other man was Commander Park Min-suk. He was young, sharp, and proud. He had finished first in his class at the academy. He believed in technology, in strategy, in clean, perfect solutions. He looked down at Ji-hoo, and his lips twisted into a slight sneer. "Look at her, Sergeant," Park Min-suk said. His voice was smooth and confident. A being of pure muscle. It's like watching an ancient historical recording. We live in an age of anti-gravity and plasma cannons. What real use is she? Lee Chul let out a soft sigh. He had this conversation too many times. She carries what a whole squad of Geks cannot, sir. She doesn't get tired. Her body is the tool we need when the power fails. When the machines stop. Park Min-suk waved a hand, dismissing the idea. That is a plan for failure. I do not make plans for failure. I make plans so that failure does not happen. Her presence here is an embarrassment. It tells the galaxy that the Great Core still needs to recruit from a planet of savages to do its heavy lifting. Down below, Ji-hoo finished her check. She closed the panel on the loader with a firm push. She could feel the eyes on her from above. She did not look up. She knew what they thought. She had heard the word Deathworlder whispered behind her back more times than she could count. Her friend, Kim Hannah, walked over. Hannah was also from Earth, but she worked in the communications section. She was smaller than Ji-hoo, with a kind face that often held a smile. Today it did not. "The commander is watching you again," Hannah said quietly, handing Ji-hoo a water container. "I know," Ji-hoo replied, taking a long drink. "He does not understand. He thinks because we are strong, we are stupid." Hannah shook her head. "He has never known a day of real struggle in his life." Ji-hoo just nodded. She was not a person of many words. Her strength was not just in her body, but in her silence. She let her actions speak for her. It was a lesson she had learned early on Earth. Talking did not move a fallen tree. Strength did. Later that day, a call came over the comms. A supply ship had delivered a new engine part for a scout vessel. The part was a large, dense cylinder of metal. It was not extremely heavy for the station's cranes, but it was in a tight spot. The main cargo mover was down for maintenance. The Geks crew was trying to move it with anti-gravity sleds. Ji-hoo and Lee Chul arrived to see the problem. The 4 Geks were chittering nervously. Their sleds were floating, but the part was too long. It kept bumping into the walls of the narrow corridor. They could not steer it properly. "Stand aside," Li Chul said, his voice calm but firm. The Gex moved back, their many arms waving in frustration. Li Chul looked at Ji-Hu. "Can you do it?" Ji-Hu looked at the part. She judged its weight. She looked at the clear path to the scout ship. She nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." She walked over to the metal cylinder. She did not use a sled. She bent her knees, wrapped her arms around it, and lifted. Her back remained straight, all the power coming from her legs and core. It was a weight that would have been impossible for a Lumine or a Gex. For Ji-Hu, it was just heavy. She took slow, steady steps down the corridor. Her boots made solid thuds on the deck. She carried the part all the way to the scout ship and set it down gently where the engineers needed it. The Gex chittered in amazement. The Lumine watched with wide, unblinking eyes from the end of the corridor. Commander Park Min-suk had seen it all. His face was a mask of cold displeasure. He saw not a problem solved, but a challenge to his entire worldview. He saw a brute force action that, in his mind, had no place in his modern, efficient core. He turned and walked away, his mind already working. He would find a way to prove that her kind of strength was useless. He would set up a situation where technology and planning would win, and her primitive power would fail. He would show everyone the truth. He did not understand the other truth. The one Sergeant Li Chul knew. The one Ji-Hu lived every day. True strength was not just for show. It was for the moment when all the lights went out. And on a station built by beings who had never known real darkness, that was a lesson someone was going to learn the hard way. The station's main training arena was a vast, echoing space that could be reconfigured to simulate many environments. Today, it was the interior of a derelict starship. The walls were made to look like scorched and broken metal. Fake smoke drifted from damaged consoles. The lighting was low and red, signaling an emergency state. It was designed to feel dangerous, but it was a controlled kind of danger. For the beings taking part in the exercise, it was a serious test of skill. For Commander Park Min-suk, it was a stage. He stood on the primary observation platform, his uniform perfect, his posture straight. He was surrounded by his command staff and the operators of his new pride and joy, the Aegis anti-gravity sled team. The sleds were sleek, silver discs that floated silently a foot above the ground. They used complex gravity fields to lift and move immense weights with perfect control. They were the future, and Park Min-suk was their biggest supporter. The mission was simple. Deep inside the simulated derelict was a core component, an iridium power regulator. It was a dense, 5-ton block of metal. The scenario was that the ship had lost all power. The team had to navigate the narrow, twisted corridors and extract the regulator. It was a job for precision, not brute force. "Watch closely," Park Min-suk said to Sergeant Li Chul, who stood quietly beside him. "This is how modern problems are solved. With technology and training, not with, Li Chul said nothing. He just watched the screens showing the team's progress. Down in the simulation, the 4 sled operators moved with careful grace. They floated their sleds into position around the heavy regulator. With a low hum, the gravity fields engaged. The massive block of metal lifted smoothly from the deck. It was an impressive sight. Park Min-suk allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "You see, Sergeant? Perfect control. Nostran. Noswet." The team began to move the regulator through the derelict. The first corridor was wide, and they moved easily. The problem came at the first turn. The passage narrowed, with broken pipes and fallen beams creating an obstacle course. The sleds, needing a clear perimeter to function optimally, started to have trouble. The lead sled operator, a skilled Lumine, tried to guide his sled through a tight gap. The edge of his gravity field brushed against a twisted beam. The sled beeped a warning. The regulator, suspended in the overlapping fields, wobbled. The other operators compensated, their movements becoming jerky and nervous. "Steady now," Park Min-suk murmured, his smile fading. "Just take it slow." But slow was not easy in the tight space. Another sled clipped a wall. The sharp impact sent a feedback pulse through its system. The sled's lights flickered. The gravity field stuttered for a heart-stopping second. The 5-ton regulator dropped a few inches with a loud, grinding crash before the fields restabilized. A collective gasp went up from the observers. The team was shaken. They tried to readjust, but the damage was done. The unstable fields pushed the regulator sideways. It slammed into a bulkhead, and this time the impact was too much. The sled's systems overloaded. The hum died. The gravity fields vanished. The iridium power regulator crashed down onto the deck plates with a sound of finality that echoed through the entire arena. The red lights on the sleds turned solid, indicating a critical failure. The exercise was over. They had failed. A silence fell over the observation deck. Park Min-suk's face was pale with anger and humiliation. His perfect technology, his flawless plan, had been defeated by a few narrow corridors. He had been made to look foolish in front of his crew. His eyes scanned the room, looking for a way to salvage his pride. And they landed on Kang Ji-hoo. She was standing near the entrance to the arena, having just finished her shift. She had watched the end of the exercise with a calm, unreadable expression. To Park Min-suk, that calmness felt like a judgment. Felt like she was laughing at him without making a sound. The anger in his chest boiled over. He would turn this failure into a lesson. A lesson for her. He strode off the platform, his boots clicking sharply on the floor. Lee Chul saw his intent and moved to intercept him. "Commander, I don't think that's wise." Park Min-suk ignored him. He walked right up to Ji-hoo. The crew in the area fell silent, watching the confrontation. "Deathworlder," Park Min-suk said, his voice loud and clear in the quiet room. The word was an insult, and he meant it to be. Ji-hoo turned her head slowly to look at him. Her expression did not change. "They say you can lift anything," he continued, a mocking tone in his voice. "I saw you carry that engine part. A simple task. But this," he gestured toward the simulation arena, "this was a real challenge, and my best technology failed. So, I have a wager for you." Lee Chul stepped closer. "Sir, this is not the time." "It is the perfect time, Sergeant," Park Min-suk snapped, his eyes still locked on Ji-hoo. "I wager my month's pay and a formal commendation in your file that you cannot do it. You cannot extract that regulator where my best machines and my best crew failed." He was challenging her in front of everyone. He was using his rank and his status to pressure her. He wanted to prove that her strength was useless. Ji-hoo looked from the commander's angry face to the sergeant's worried one. She then looked past them into the simulated derelict. She looked at the heavy block of metal sitting on the deck. She knew it was a trap. She knew he was trying to use her to make himself feel better. But she also saw the doubt on the faces of the other crew members. They had all watched the sleds fail. They wondered if the commander was right. They wondered if her strength was just a party trick. She looked back at Park Min-suk. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the silent room. "I will show you," she said. A murmur ran through the crowd. Lee Chul closed his eyes for a second, shaking his head. Park Min-suk's lips curled into a cold, triumphant smile. He had her. Now he would see her fail and order would be restored. "The simulation parameters remain the same," he announced. "No power, no tools, just you." Ji-hoo simply nodded. She walked past him and into the red-lit darkness of the derelict ship. The audience, every single person who had been in the training arena, moved to the observation windows to watch. This was no longer a standard exercise. This was a spectacle. Park Min-suk returned to his platform, his confidence returning. He had set the stage. Now he would watch the Deathworlder prove her own irrelevance. He did not understand that he was not testing her strength. He was testing his own understanding of the world. And he was about to fail. A heavy silence fell over the observation deck. Every screen was tuned to the internal cameras of the simulation. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the single figure walking into the red-lit darkness of the derelict ship. This was no longer a training exercise. It was a trial. Commander Park Min-suk stood with his arms crossed, a faint, cold smile on his face. He expected a show of futile effort. Sergeant Lee Chul stood nearby, his face a mask of quiet concern. He knew the weight Jihu was about to face, both the metal one and the one of everyone's expectations. Inside the simulation, the air was still and cool. The only sounds were the faint hiss of fake smoke and the steady, solid sound of Jihu's boots on the deck plates. She did not rush. The first obstacle was a fallen support beam. It was not part of the original scenario. It must have been dislodged when the regulator crashed. For the sled team, it would have been a major problem. For Jihu, it was just something in the way. She stopped and looked at it. It was a thick length of metal, longer than she was tall. She bent her knees, got her hands underneath it, and with a powerful, straight-backed lift, she hauled it upright. She did not throw it. She guided its weight and leaned it carefully against the wall, clearing the path. A soft murmur of surprise went through the watching crowd. She had solved the first problem in 10 seconds without a machine. She continued on, her movements economical. She reached the main corridor where the regulator sat. The massive block of dark metal looked like a sleeping beast in the bad light. It was sitting flat on the deck where it had fallen. The sleds had been designed to lift it from the top. Jihu had no such luxury. She walked a full circle around it, her eyes tracing its shape. She was not just looking at it. She was learning it. She was judging its balance, its points of contact with the floor. She saw a narrow service groove running along its base. It was not meant for lifting, but it was all she had. She moved to one side of the block. She placed her feet wide, planting her boots firmly. This was not about speed. This was about foundation. Every muscle in her body had to work together. She bent her knees, not her back, sinking down into a deep crouch. The fabric of her uniform tightened across her shoulders. She slid the fingers of both hands into the narrow groove. The metal was cold and hard against her skin. She took a deep, slow breath, filling her lungs. Then another. She was focusing her mind, gathering her will as much as her strength. The crowd on the observation deck was utterly silent. You could hear the hum of the station's life support. Then, she began to pull. That it was not a sudden, explosive movement. It was a slow, grinding, terrible exertion. The muscles in her arms, back, and legs corded into hard knots. A low, guttural sound started deep in her chest, a sound of pure, raw effort. The veins in her neck and on her temples stood out like wires. The regulator did not want to move. It was 5 tons of inert metal, and it was content to stay where it was. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Park Min-suk's smile returned. He saw her straining, her body shaking with the effort, and he saw failure. This was what he wanted. Proof that flesh was weak. But then, something changed. A sharp, screeching sound echoed through the derelict. It was the sound of metal grinding against metal. The regulator shifted. It was a tiny movement, less than an inch, but it was a movement. Jihu let out a sharp breath and readjusted her grip, her fingers white from the pressure. She took another deep breath and pulled again. The screech came again, louder this time. The block tilted. It was no longer sitting flat. One edge was now off the deck. Jihu's body was trembling with the strain, but she held it. She was now in a battle against the regulator's own weight and the constant, invisible pull of the station's gravity. It was a battle of inches. With a final, explosive grunt, she put every last ounce of her strength into one more pull. The regulator rose up onto its edge, balancing precariously. Jihu quickly shifted her stance, keeping her body braced against it, preventing it from crashing back down. She stood there for a moment, her chest heaving, sweat pouring down her face and darkening the collar of her uniform. Her arms and legs were shaking from the tremendous effort. She had done it. She had moved the immovable object. The silence on the observation deck was broken by a few scattered, awed whispers. The Lumine and the Gex looked at each other in disbelief. They had never seen such a display of pure physical power. It was something from their ancient myths. Li Chul let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He felt a surge of pride for his soldier. She had taken a foolish challenge and was turning it into a demonstration of incredible will. Park Min-suk's smile was gone. His face was pale and stiff. He had not expected this. He had expected her to try and fail to prove his point. He had not expected her to succeed. Her success was a direct insult to his logic, to his technology, to his entire way of thinking. He watched her, standing there holding the giant block on its edge, and he felt a cold knot of anger and something else. Something that felt a little like fear. Jihu did not look at the cameras. She did not care about the audience. Her focus was entirely on the block. The hardest part was over, but the job was not done. She had to move it. She began to walk it forward, like moving a giant, heavy wheel. Each step was a careful, controlled shuffle. She would push the top of the regulator, let it fall forward a few inches, and then stop its momentum with her own body. It was a slow, dangerous dance between woman and metal. She guided it through the narrow corridors, around the same corners that had defeated the sleds. She used her body as both engine and brake. It was a brutal, primitive, and utterly effective method. She was halfway to the extraction point when the entire station was shaken by a deep, violent shudder. It was not part of the simulation. The red emergency lights in the training arena were replaced by the flashing crimson of a real, station-wide alert. A loud, blaring alarm cut through the air, so urgent it made everyone jump. The real test was over. A new one, a real one, had just begun. The station shook again, a deep groan of stressed metal that was felt in the bones. The flashing red alarm lights painted everyone's faces in pulses of panic. The simulation screens flickered and died as primary power faltered. The gentle hum of the station was replaced by the whine of backup systems struggling to come online. For a moment, everyone on the observation deck was frozen, confused by the sudden shift from drama to real crisis. Then training took over. Sergeant Lee Chul was the first to move, barking orders into his comm unit. "Report. What is the situation?" A frantic, staticky voice replied. "Command, this is Lab Gamma. We had a containment failure. An energy wave. It's knocked out systems across the sector. We have a collapse inside." The details scrolled across a secondary screen that was still active. A science lab experimenting with experimental power cores had suffered a catastrophic breach. The resulting energy surge had acted like an electromagnetic pulse, frying delicate electronics and overloading gravity control systems. Lee Chul's blood ran cold as he read the next line. "Casualty report. Is anyone trapped?" The voice on the comm was shaking. "Yes, Commander Park Min-suk. He was doing a personal inspection tour. A support beam came down in the main lab corridor. The door is sealed. The emergency release is on our side. But the debris, we can't get to it. Life support in his section is failing." A map of the station flashed up. Lab Gamma. Lee Chul's eyes widened. It was in the same sector as the training arena. In fact, it shared a structural design with the derelict ship simulation. It was an old part of the station with heavy, manual safety doors. He looked from the map to the dark entrance of the simulation arena. His mind made the connection instantly. The same narrow corridors. The same kind of heavy door. The same problem of moving through debris without power. The anti-gravity sleds were useless. Their systems were delicate. The energy surge would have turned them into expensive paperweights. The heavy loaders and cutting tools were dead. Their electronic ignitions and controls fried. The station's gravity plating had failed, reverting to the standard weak pull. But the objects on the station still had their mass. A 5-ton beam was still a 5-ton beam, even if it felt lighter. Moving it without leverage or power was nearly impossible. They were back in the Stone Age. And there was only one person on the entire station whose most important tool had not been affected by the power failure. Lee Chul turned from his comm unit and ran towards the simulation entrance. The crowd of crew members parted for him. He ignored Commander Park's stunned expression on the observation deck. That didn't matter now. Only one thing mattered. He found Jihu just inside the derelict simulation. She had let the regulator crash back down to the deck when the real alarm blared. She was standing, listening, her body still tense from her effort, her face slick with sweat. She looked at Lee Chul's face and knew immediately this was real. "Jihu," he said, his voice tight and urgent. It's Lab Gamma. The commander is trapped. A beam collapsed. The door is sealed. The manual release is on the other side of a debris field. The power is out. The tools are dead. He didn't need to say anything else. He didn't need to give her an order. He didn't need to ask if she could do it. He was simply telling her the problem. Jihu nodded once. The tiredness seemed to fall away from her, replaced by a new, sharp focus. The challenge for Pride was over. This was for a life. "Show me," she said. Li Chul led the way at a run. A small team of engineers, including a few Geks, fell in behind them, carrying heavy manual tools, hydraulic rams and pry bars that were now their only option. They rushed through the station's corridors, which were dimly lit by emergency lights. The air was already getting stale. They reached the entrance to Lab Gamma. The scene was worse than the simulation. A thick metal beam had fallen from the ceiling, and with it came a cascade of broken panels, twisted pipes, and sparking wires. Coolant was leaking from a severed pipe, forming a slippery, smelly pool on the floor. On the other side of the mess was a large, sealed bulkhead door. Behind that door was Park Minsuk. The engineering team got to work. They tried to use the pry bars on the main beam. It barely shifted. They set up the hydraulic ram. It was slow, difficult work in the tight space. They managed to lift the beam a few inches, but it was not enough to clear a path to the door. Li Chul looked at the manual release wheel on the door. It was large and red. It was a brute force mechanism, a last resort. It was designed to be operated when all power was lost. But it required immense strength to turn, needing to overcome gears that had not moved in years. It was a 300-kilo pull at least. He looked at his team. They were strong, but they were not from a high-gravity world. Their muscles were not built for this kind of raw physical demand. They were struggling with the debris. The release wheel was beyond any of them. He turned to Jihu. She was already moving. "Clear the small stuff," she said, her voice calm amidst the chaos. The engineers moved back. Jihu stepped into the debris field. She ignored the coolant soaking her boots. She kicked aside a broken console. She grabbed a twisted pipe and bent it out of the way with a screech of metal. She was not just strong. She was efficient. She created a path where none existed, moving the smaller wreckage that was slowing the team down. She reached the main fallen beam. It was similar to the one in the simulation, but bigger, and it was pinning other debris beneath it. She didn't try to lift it straight up. She assessed it, found a point of leverage, and put her shoulder against it. With a powerful, steady push, she shifted it sideways, just enough for the engineers to slide the ram deeper and get a better lift. It was a team effort now, but she was the engine. With the beam lifted a few more inches, the path to the bulkhead door was almost clear. Jihu stepped through the gap. She stood before the large, red wheel. On the other side of the metal, they could all hear it now. A faint, desperate pounding. "Stand back from the door," Li Chul shouted, his voice firm and commanding. The pounding stopped. Jihu placed her hands on the cold steel of the wheel. Her palms, still raw from the simulation, stung at the touch. She planted her feet firmly in the mess on the floor, finding a solid stance. She took a deep breath. This was different. This was not for a wager. This was not to prove a point. This was for a life. She poured every ounce of her strength into her arms and shoulders. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The wheel was frozen solid, seized by years of disuse. She adjusted her grip, her breath hissing through her teeth. She pushed harder, her entire body straining. The muscles in her back and legs felt like they were on fire. The station, the alarm, the watching eyes, it all faded away. There was only the wheel, and the man on the other side. Then, with a loud, sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot in the confined space, the mechanism broke free. The wheel spun. With a heavy, grinding hiss, the bulkhead door began to slide open. The heavy door slid open with a sound of grinding metal that was louder than the alarm. A cloud of thick, black smoke billowed out from the gap, carrying the bitter smell of burned wiring and melted plastic. For a second, no one could see anything inside. Then, a figure stumbled through the smoke, coughing violently, His eyes wide with panic and terror. It was Commander Park Min-suk. His perfect uniform was smudged with soot. His usually neat hair was disheveled. He tripped over a piece of debris on the floor and would have fallen if Sergeant Lee Chul and another crew member hadn't rushed forward to catch him. They pulled him back, away from the toxic smoke and into the clearer air of the outer corridor. He collapsed against the wall, his body shaking, sucking in deep, ragged breaths of the stale but breathable air. He looked around, his mind struggling to understand what had happened. His eyes were blurred from the smoke, but they slowly began to focus. They moved over the faces of the rescue team, the worried Gex, the determined Lumine, the tired sergeant. And then his gaze landed on Kang Ji-hoo. She was still standing by the open bulkhead door, one hand resting on the large, red will she had just turned. Her chest was heaving as she tried to catch her own breath. Sweat and coolant streaked her face and uniform. Her hands, where they gripped the wheel, were raw and bleeding. She looked exhausted, pushed to her absolute limit. But she was standing. Park Min-suk's mind, still fuzzy with fear, began to put the pieces together. He remembered the crash, the beam falling, the door sealing. He remembered the pounding on the door, his own desperate pounding from the inside. He remembered the heat building, the air getting thick. He remembered the final, terrifying moments when he thought it was over. Then he remembered the sound. Not the sound of cutting tools or machines. The sound of a sharp, powerful crack. The sound of the wheel turning. The sound of the door opening. His eyes moved from Ji-hoo's tired face, down her arm, to the wheel. He looked at the debris field behind her. He saw the beam she had shifted. He saw the path she had cleared. He saw the hydraulic ram his engineering team had barely been able to use. And he understood. There had been no technology to save him. His precious anti-gravity sleds were useless. The power was out. The machines were dead. The plan for a clean, technological rescue had failed before it could even start. He had been saved by the one thing he had mocked. The one thing he had called primitive and obsolete. The raw, physical strength of the Deathworlder. She had moved the one thing his entire army and all his technology could not. The immovable object that stood between him and death. The arrogance that had filled him on the observation deck was gone. The cold anger he felt when she lifted the regulator was gone. All that was left was a hollow, shaking awe. He stared at Ji-hoo, and she looked back at him. Her expression was not one of triumph or pride. It was just tired. She had done what needed to be done. That was all. Lee Chul was at his side, checking him for injuries. "Are you hurt, Commander? Can you breathe?" Park Min-suk barely heard him. He couldn't look away from Ji-hoo. He tried to find words, but his throat was too tight. He could only manage a slow, dazed shake of his head. The medical team arrived then, their uniforms bright white in the dim emergency light. They gently but firmly took hold of Park Min-suk, guiding him to a waiting stretcher. He didn't resist. He let them lead him away, his head turning to keep Ji-hoo in his sight for as long as possible. As he was carried down the corridor, the reality of his rescue sank in deeper. He had not been saved by a machine he had designed or a strategy he had planned. He had been saved by a person he had publicly insulted and belittled. She had every reason to leave him there. She could have said the task was impossible. No one would have blamed her. But she didn't. She had used her strength, the very thing he had challenged, to save his life. Lee Chul watched the commander being taken away. He then turned his attention to Ji-hoo. He walked over to her. She had finally let go of the wheel and was just standing there, looking at her bleeding hands. "Medic!" Lee Chul called out. "Over here." Ji-hoo looked up at him. "I am okay, Sergeant." "You are not okay," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You need to be checked. That is an order." A medic came over and started to look at Ji-hoo's hands, cleaning the cuts and applying a soothing gel. Lee Chul stood by her side, a quiet, solid presence. He didn't praise her. He didn't need to. His pride in her was clear in his eyes. Around them, the station crew was beginning the work of cleanup and repair. The immediate crisis was over. But the memory of what had happened in this corridor would not fade quickly. They had all seen it. They had seen the limits of their technology. And they had seen the power that lived in the quiet, strong woman from the Deathworld. For Jihu, the drama was over. The challenge was finished. She had done her job. Now she was just tired, and her hands hurt. She let the medic work, her mind already shifting away from the rescue. She was thinking about a shower and then sleep. But for Park Min-suk, lying on a cot in the infirmary, it was just beginning. He was safe. He was alive. And he was starting to understand the true weight of the debt he owed, and the true meaning of the strength he had so foolishly challenged. The infirmary was quiet. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled the air. Commander Park Min-suk lay on a clean, white bed. The doctors had checked him. He had inhaled some smoke and he was bruised, but he was okay. His body was fine. It was his mind that was troubled. He could not stop seeing it. The image was stuck in his head. The dark, smoky corridor, the debris, and Kang Ji-hoo, standing by the giant wheel, her hands bloody, her body shaking from effort. She had looked like some ancient hero from a story, not a modern soldier. He had thought her strength was a simple thing, like the power of a machine. You turned it on, it did a job, you turned it off. He now knew he was wrong. Her strength was not simple. It was complex. It was not just in her muscles. It was in her will. She had chosen to use that incredible power to save him, even after he had been cruel to her. That thought made his face feel hot with shame. He sat up. He needed to do something. He could not just lie here. He got out of the bed. His legs felt a little weak, but he ignored it. A nurse tried to stop him, but he waved her away. "I am fine," he said. His voice rough. He walked out of the infirmary. The station was still in a state of repair. Crews were working to fix the damaged systems. The main lights were back on, but the signs of the accident were everywhere. He walked through the corridors, not sure where he was going. His feet seemed to know the way. He found himself outside the door to the barracks where the human soldiers lived. He took a deep breath and went inside. The room was plain and functional. Kang Ji-hoo was sitting on the edge of her bed. Her friend, Kim Hannah, was there, carefully wrapping clean bandages around Ji-hoo's hands. The cuts from the metal wheel were deep. Ji-hoo looked up as he entered. Her expression was calm as always. It gave no hint of what she was thinking. Hannah looked at the commander, her eyes wary. She did not trust him. She had seen how he treated her friend. Park Min-suk stopped a few feet from the bed. He suddenly felt very young and very foolish. The words he had planned to say seemed stupid and empty now. He looked at Ji-hoo's bandaged hands. He had caused that. His pride had led to those injuries. He swallowed hard. "Specialist Kang," he began, his voice quieter than usual. I owe you my life." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I was wrong. I thought strength was something you could build in a reactor, or code into a machine." He looked directly at her, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I thought your kind of strength was primitive. I see now that I was the one who did not understand." He gestured weakly toward her hands. "You saved me. After everything I said to you, you could have let me. You did not have to." He could not finish the sentence. Ji-hoo listened quietly. She looked at the commander's face. She saw the arrogance was gone. In its place was a raw, honest humility. She saw that he was truly sorry. She shifted on the bed. "On Earth, Commander," she said, her voice soft but clear, "we have a saying. The strongest weight is not the one you lift to prove a point. It is the one you carry for someone else." The words hung in the air between them. Park Min-suk felt their meaning settle deep inside him. He had challenged her to lift the regulator to prove his own point, to make himself feel superior. But she had lifted the real weight, the one that mattered, not for pride, but for a life. She had carried the responsibility he had been too blind to see. He nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to the floor. He understood now. Her strength was not for showing off. It was for bearing burdens. It was for helping others. It was a strength of character, not just of body. "There will be a formal commendation in your file," he said, looking up again. "And my month's pay." I lost the wager. You succeeded where I failed. Jihu gave a small shake of her head. The wager does not matter, Commander. But it does, he insisted. It matters to me. I must honor my word. He took another step closer. And I will make sure the entire command knows what you did here today. They will know that the strength of Earth is not a curse. It is a gift, one that saved my life. He gave a short, stiff bow. It was a sign of deep respect. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the barracks. The door hissed shut behind him. Kim Hannah looked at Jihu, her eyebrows raised in surprise. Well, she said, I did not expect that. Jihu looked at her bandaged hands. She flexed her fingers slowly. They were sore, but they would heal. People can change, she said simply. Out in the corridor, Park Min-suk walked back toward the command deck. The station felt different to him now. He saw the crew working, the Lumine with their grace, the Geks with their skill. And he saw the human soldiers, their earthborn bodies moving with a power he finally respected. He had learned a lesson more valuable than any he had been taught at the academy. He had learned that true strength has many forms, and the most powerful one is the strength that is used for others. The Deathworld girl had not just lifted a heavy weight. She had lifted the weight of his ignorance. And in doing so, she had saved more than just his life. She had saved his honor.